What's going on, guys? So in this video, I'm gonna go over the program that I use for my 3D printer, and I'm gonna share some of the settings that I use for the filaments to get such awesome prints. So if you're new here, I usually do FPV drone builds, tutorials, I do flight videos, and I do reviews. So if you're interested in that, consider punching that subscribe button. Now, recently I've added 3D printing to this channel, and the reason why is because I feel like FPV and 3D printing were made for one another. So I feel like it's beneficial to this channel to meld the two together and to share my experiences with you. So if you're new here, consider punching that subscribe button. So in this video, I'm gonna show you how to use Cura, how to set some of the settings, how to find some of the hidden settings, and I'm also going to go into some of the settings that I use for my prints, because I seem to be getting some pretty awesome prints out of PETG, and I'm going to share my settings for that. And I tell you what, there's a reason why, because every single other video or article that I've read about PETG all tells you to do things one way, and I do it the other way, and it's working. So, you know, maybe it's wrong, maybe it's not, I don't know, but it's working for me. So let's go into that. So this is a program that I use. This is what's called a slicer. What it does is it takes your solid form object and slices it up into layers, and this is basically how you control your 3D printer. So one of the first things that we're going to want to do is set our printer. To do that, we go to add printer, and you're not going to find one on the network. So what you're going to do is click down here, a non-networked printer, and we're going to look for Creality 3D. This is the printer that I have, so I'm looking for the Ender 3. I'm going to click that, and then I'm going to click add to add the printer. I don't need to do that because I have done that previously. So there you can see Creality Ender 3, and that holds all the settings for this printer. Next, we go over here, and we're gonna pick both our material, which is the filament that we're using, and the nozzle size, which is 0.04. That's the stock nozzle that comes on the Ender 3 Pro, and I believe it's also the same nozzle that comes on the Ender 3. It's a very common nozzle, so odds are that's what you have. Over here, the material, you can pick generic. Some of the common ones that we use for FPV and for prop building are PETG or PLA, and I tend to stay away from the PLA. It does not bode well in the heat of a car in the summer. If you were to leave your thing out there, it would actually melt and completely deform. So I've migrated to PETG, and I've got my settings dialed down, so I print with that, and I print with TPU, which is down here. So for this, I'm going to use PETG. So I did speak of some hidden features. To get to those, we're going to go to Preferences and Configure Cura. All right, so if we go to Settings, you can see all these extra hidden features. So if I start talking about a feature in here that you don't see, it's because I've added it. And for me to go down and remember which ones I've added in this are going to be more difficult than if I can say that I've added it when I'm going through this. So let's do that. But I mean, this list is huge. It's broken down into the different facets of the 3D printer. Like travel is how fast your hot end will move. Cooling is your fan speeds and stuff like that. Supports are if there's any overhanging things, you can put a support underneath it to keep it from overhanging. So there's a lot that you can add here. So once we're set with that, then you can go over here and click on this. And now this is usually how it's set up, where you just pick, do you want support, do you want adhesion? And this is very user friendly. But when we're printing in the PETG, we want to go into custom. So inside of custom, here are my settings. So I've got infill set to 20, that's stock. The material printing temperature, I go to 240. And then there's build plate temperature, which is, I go to 90. A lot of people will tell you you don't need heat for PETG. I find that the hotter I run, the more it sticks. I don't know, maybe I'm doing something wrong, but this works for me. The thing that I added here is build plate temperature initial layer. This is the first layer is 90C. So what I had tried doing here was I put this at 90C and then put this at 85C. And just the act of the part cooling down 5C made it want to peel up a little bit. So I put these both to 90, but no, that's a thing that you can adjust. Then print speed, I went down to 45 millimeters a second. Then these two I added. Initial layer print speed. I got this printing super slow, and that helps with it sticking to the build plate. Then the number of slow layers I set to 3, and what that allows is the first layer to really stick, and then the next layers to really adhere to it, and that works out pretty good for me. Then over here we can enable print cooling, and I have changed this to 0. I don't want my part cooling, because with PETG, anytime that part starts cooling, it starts to retract and it will start peeling from the build plate, and that causes problems. So next I went to support, and generate support is normally a thing that's by default. Support placement is by default, and this you can have it just touching the build plate, or you can actually have it build supports from your part. I usually leave it on this unless a part requires it. Support overhang angle is 45, that's stock. Support pattern and support density is also stock. The other thing I commonly use here is a brim, and what that is a flat section around your part that is touching your part. The other things that we can have here is a skirt or a raft. A raft is exactly what it sounds like. It builds a raft underneath your part. And I will use that if I'm printing a lot of small parts or feel like wasting a bunch of material. I have since switched mostly to brim now that I have these settings fairly dialed in. So once we're done with that, this is not a dual extrusion machine, so we don't need to worry about that. So I can close that. So in order to import a part, I just bring the Windows screen open, grab the part that I want, and then drag it into Cura. And what it will do is it will place the part the way the designer has intended it. Now, and you are free to change it around within the program. Now, to move this, and let me tell you what this is. These squares here, this is to simulate your build plate where you're going to be printing from. You can line it flat like this. You can spin it around. How I'm spinning it around is I'm holding the right mouse key, and it allows you to do all directions looking at your part. So once you have that orientated, the other thing that you can do is you can hold shift and grab your build plate with the mouse, and then it allows you to move the build plate on the screen wherever you so choose. And the other thing that we can do is if you have a mouse wheel, you can zoom in and zoom out. So those are the basic functions that you can do there. Now if I turn this part around, you'll notice most of it is in yellow, but some of it is in red. Anything that's in red requires support, or at least Cura thinks it requires supports. Now this, if I were to print it just like this without supports, this thing would fall over very quickly. It would probably get to about here in the print, and then as soon as it starts out printing this is going to droop down maybe. And even if it did successfully print this, eventually just the action of it pushing down over here would leverage this clean off the build plate, and then you will have a rat's nest because the printer doesn't know the part came off and it's going to continue to print. So what I do with a part like this, let me hold shift and drag this down and then set this a little bit on an angle here. I'm going to select the part with my left mouse key, and then you end up with this here. These different menus here, we can move this part. As you can see, there's 3 arrows here. We can move it right and left, front and back, or up and down. And to do that, you just kind of highlight over the arrow,
And as you can see, we can pick this thing up and we can print this in midair if we wanted to. Cura is going to drag it right back down to the build plate. So there is a setting if you wanted to do that where you can not lock orientation. Next, over here we have our scale. And it's the same thing here. We have our 3 boxes and we can set our X, our Y, or our Z axis. So if we wanted to make this thing a lot bigger, we can just adjust these. Let's say we do this one to 150. You'll see that automatically across all 3 things here, because we have uniform scaling, this thing scales up to 150%, but we don't want that. We want this at 100. So if you needed to make a part bigger or smaller, that's how to do it. And that's a uniform scaling. Now you can change, just if we take that off, let's change the Y-axis to 200 and make this thing really long. So that's just some of the things that we can do there. I'm going to leave that on uniform scaling and everything at 100%. Now here's what we're going to do with this. This is your rotation. Now snap rotation, it's going to snap to 15-degree increments. If I grab this red circle, as you can see, it wants to rotate the part this way, or the green circle will rotate it the other way, or we can rotate it circular if we grab the blue. And this doesn't always work the way you hope. See, now we're circulating on the blue. I'm going to put it back where it was. What I want to do is flip this so that this is on the bottom. So I'm going to grab this red and I'm going to circle around. And as you can see, it's doing 15-degree increments. Just like that. Now I'm going to click this one to align it with the build plate, and as you can see, it is touching the build plate all the way around. What we don't want is something like this, where your part is sitting a little bit on an angle, or even less than that. And because I took off snap rotation, it's very easy to do this. Now it'll move in 1-degree increments. So this is 2 degrees off, and you can kind of tell just by, you see how you got that little tick right there, a tick right there, a tick right there. You want that a nice flat piece. So if I take this and go back to reset, it resets the part back to where it was. I'm going to turn snap rotation back on. I'm going to go to 90 degrees and I'm going to place it on the build plate. And now you can see it is straight and flat. Earlier what I said about the pixels, that's just the screen. There's nothing that I can do about that. So I apologize for that. That's wrong. So there is our part the way that we want to print it on the slicer. The other thing that we can do mirror images, or we can mesh different parts of models. I still have never messed with these. I don't find the use. It's just the top 3 that I deal with. Okay, so once we have our part on the build plate and where we want it, this is centered, we're going to go up here and make sure our settings are correct for this specific part. So for this one, I do not want supports. As you can see, there is a little bit of red here, but I'm confident that my printer will print these lines no problem without supports. So I'm not going to waste the product or filament to print that. So all my other settings are correct. I know because we went through them earlier. So once your settings are set, then go over here down to the slice button. And it's going to take a little while, and it will work through your object, and then it will give you an idea of time frame and the amount of filament you will possibly use. So 46 meters of filament, it should weigh in at 155 grams, and it should take us 16 hours and 26 minutes. This is a very long print. So now what we can do is save this to file, or in my case, I will take a micro SD card and put it into the computer, and after a moment or two, Cura will recognize the fact that there is a removable drive into one of the slots. So I'm going to click Save to Removable. It's going to go ahead and save it as this code here, this G code. It spits out a G code. And if you're confused as to what this G code is, it will say right here what the G code is. And you can edit that using this button here. So I'm going to go ahead and eject the card. It's going to tell me it's safe to remove it. And I'm gonna go ahead and pull out the card. So once the card is out, you can go ahead and put that in your 3D printer and you are ready to go.
So that's a quick look at Cura and some of the settings that you'll use and some of the settings that are hidden that I feel like you should have active or shouldn't be hidden at all. Now in the future, I am going to show you the kind of 101 on how to quickly set up your printer for the first print. This was kind of just a quickly set up your slicer program for your first print and just how to dial in a certain material. The settings in Cura, as I told you earlier in the video, for PLA are like spot on. So don't even really screw with those. Just set that, forget it, whatever. But the PETG, the changes that I have showed you, it works for my printer. I'm using the Ender 3 Pro. So if you're using a different printer, you might have different results. Also, if you're using a different filament, I use eSun, which is very similar to Matter Hacker's PETG. I really don't see much of a difference besides two, so I just kind of order whichever one is cheaper, and the same settings kind of work. I actually really feel that the eSun is just a little bit better. Just a little bit. I have more problems with the Matter Hackers kind of peeling up than I do the eSun. But this is also before I dialed in my settings, so I really want to go back and try the Matter Hackers again. Yeah, so if you enjoyed this video, click that thumbs up button. And if you haven't done it already, go ahead and punch that subscribe button because you only get to do it once and it's fun, and I'll catch you later. Peace. What's going on, guys? So in this video, I'm gonna go into the program that I use for my 3D print.